Hello there, welcome. Today I'm going to talk about Legion, which is the X-Men TV show by Noah Hawley, who is who did the Fargo TV show and he's recently done Alien Earth. And this was kind of one of those things where the X-Men people were before Fox was bought by Disney. He was this is one of the shows they did where it was still like a X-Men without Disney oversight. So I think the last season was filmed just before the Fox was bought, so it was like it was ending anyway, so it didn't really matter, but it was put out during the takeover. But it's a series where there was a middle, beginning and end, so it didn't really matter too much to anybody. It was like it took place in an alternative world from even the X-Men series, so it was this thing that's apart from everybody, and so it was fine. It was just his own little thing, and this is wonderful. This show is just wonderful. It's really weird because this protagonist is a strange guy and it's in a strange world, and it's inside the head of somebody who might be mad. And it takes place in a kind of weird world of like the 80s, it seems, and it's like it comes from the 60s. Like this character born in the 60s and comes into the 80s, and the fashions a kind of weird mix between a kind of retro 60s feel and a kind of 80s feel, influenced by certain things that happened in the 80s. And it does feel like it could take place in the mind of the main character, because Legion's a character who's a villain in the X-Men comics. He's the son of Charles Xavier, Professor X, and he has multiple personalities, and he's maybe one of the most powerful mutants in the world. So they decided to make a TV show out of this because it was just an interesting character. He couldn't really do that much in a film because he was so powerful that if we did a film about him, it'd have to be all about him. It was hard. You couldn't really make him a kind of character limited to film. So they made a TV show which really worked for them. It was just this thing. It was like, it came out, it gave great reviews. It wasn't the biggest hit, but it really was the kind of thing that, alongside the films they were doing, because at that point they were doing Deadpool as well. The Deadpool was making all the money. The X-Men series itself was starting to fall away with the Apocalypse movie that didn't work. But this kind of kept it kind of, the X-Men kind of respected while Deadpool made all the money. So it was actually a good mix, even though the main series was dying, other stuff around it weren't. So the basic thing is Dan Stevens plays Legion. He's a schizophrenic who may have mutant powers. Now I should say I saw the first season of this but 2 years ago. I've just watched season 2 and 3. Sometimes I have a gap between watching stuff. So my memory of season 2 and 3 is better than season 1, but I remember season 1 pretty well. Because season 1 is essentially about this guy who's in the madhouse. He's fallen in love with this character called Sid, who she's this person who can't touch. She feels everybody. She's kind of like Rogue in a way. She can switch bodies with a person who memories of the person she touches them. So she's distanced. So she's still like Rogue, but sort of not at the same time. And so he starts to fall in love with her. So he's having mental problems, and she's given physical problems that causes mental problems. So they're both in this psychiatric institute that deals with people who have mutations and just other people who have problems. And it's like high security, but also it's locked down from the world, so it's like hard to escape from. And in this thing is also David has a friend called Lenny, who's played by Aubrey Plaza, and Aubrey Plaza. My tongue's all weird today. And she's like the person who gives him all the bad advice. She was a junkie with him. She was the person who led them astray according to his memories, but you start to see that his memories could be faulty. At the same time, he's also got a character in his head, the Shadow King, who is driving him mad slowly, surely, and wants his power. And he's fighting this demon who's out to get him. So which is making his memories collapse into themselves, and him not be quite sure what his powers are, and not be quite sure what he is and what he can do. And it's just driving him mad. And it's this whole sense of who is he and what is he, and is he lying to himself about who he is and what he is. So that all goes through the first season, this sense of someone trying to work themselves out, but through a lot of weird visuals, and visuals are expressionistic in a very American way. In the sense that the world feels like influenced by how he's grown up and how he's lived it. There's the 60s feel, 50s, 60s feel of the old style idealism of the future mixed with the grime of the 80s, where everything's going wrong and everything's cynical and they think war's going to save everybody. So you get a sense of different time zones that are meshed in this guy's head, which just creates a wonderful setup for a guy who's trying to figure out who he is. Now, eventually, by the end of the season, he does escape. He does find a woman who's actually trying to help them, to help mutants. And they are getting hunted by these other guys who are trying to hunt down mutants. So it's very X-Men in that way, but it's much more about the inner life of these characters. And the Shadow King at the end of the first season escapes into the body of this guy who's been in a coma for 20 years. And then we go into the second season. When the second season starts to turn things around dramatically, there starts to be suggestions that, yeah, the Shadow King is a problem. The Shadow King's someone who's dangerous, and we don't want him to get out and find his body and become a presence that could be really damaging to people, because he might try and destroy the world. He might end the world. But David himself might be the problem. There's images of Sid coming from the past, from the future, giving information, and at one point she seduces him, and he goes along and betrays the present Sid. And there's just suggestions throughout the season that David thinks he's a good person. He's trying to be a good person. He's really working hard to find out more about Sid, to try and help her from her problems and try and help her forgive herself for her failures. And he's trying to help everybody. But there's a suggestion that maybe he doesn't see people in the right way. He might be a psychopath in some ways, but not admitting to himself. And it's like, is his past really real, or is his past been manipulated by what he wants to think of himself? So that's what's good about this whole idea of it. A lot of it takes place in his head, and what's real and what's not real. But there's also a mainstream narrative of other characters going through it the same way, that you're going from beginning to end to try and stop a villain. But the kind of blurriness of everything kind of makes everything harder to define of what's actually going on with these people. So it creates a sense of everything's up in the air. You're not quite sure what the rules actually are of this character. And the series just continues this sense of exploration. I found out in the first season that Lenny was actually dead, and it's just someone who's inside the David's head, representing the Shadow King. In the second season, she actually gets a body. The spirit goes into a body of some other person's body, and it creates a dysfunction between Lenny and the person who she's taken over, because this person was David's adopted sister, and all of this thing creates problems for him as well. It starts to push him towards maybe making darker choices than he really wants to make, or he thinks he doesn't want to make. And as the season goes on, he gets darker and darker, trying to stop the Shadow King. He thinks he's trying to do it to save the world, but there are suggestions by lots of people that he's the one who's going to destroy the world, not the Shadow King. So in season 3, he's broken away from everybody. Everyone sees him as a villain, and it's like trying to hunt down David before he destroys the world. The Shadow King's trying to help the people hunting him down. And David has become this kind of guru for all these disenfranchised young men and women, especially women. And the people who were his allies are now trying to kill him. And he's trying to play around with time travel to go back in time and stop himself from getting possessed by the Shadow King when he was a baby. Because he thinks if he does that, if he stops that from happening, he won't be the way he is, and he won't have this. He feels he's been tainted by fighting the Shadow King for so long. The kind of roughness and horrorness of the Shadow King has created these problems for him. They created these bad decisions, and then try to stop him because what he's doing is very dangerous. But as the series goes on, you start to see more about his father, because his father seemed to have abandoned him pretty much from birth, which is very unlike Professor X. And it's this sense of, why did that happen? So you go back and you actually find out who his father and his mother were, and in fact his mother had some problems that at the time she couldn't deal with, because there were like mental problems because of the tragedy she'd faced, but also what had been genetically passed down, which has been passed down to David. And it's like trying to figure out what stuff actually in him that was dangerous is because of what's happened to him, and how much is like not having parents who actually can show him like ground rules or actually help him be a stable person. Because you find a lot of Sid's past, and she had a damaged childhood as well, which has caused her massive problems with people. And the sense of she's learned to enjoy certain bits of cruelty that she feels disgusted by in herself. And it's like David's had the same problem, and it's like, well, how do you solve a monster who doesn't want to be a monster? Who's actually trying not to be a monster, and he's actually, some of the actions he does are horrible. He's actually got a kind of motivation where he does not want to destroy the world, but he knows he's going in that direction, and it's like he's trying to stop it as well. So it creates this narrative that's just wonderful, because it is all about the confusion of mental illness and what you want and what your actions are and what you actually want, and how you can delude yourself, and how you can say I'm doing one thing but you're really doing something else and you're not quite sure. Because David's also got multiple personalities, various personalities of his come out and try and stop him from doing the thing he's trying to do. And they're saying you're fine where you are, the world is wrong and things like that. So it's trying to solve that, and it's also we finally get to Professor X, a young version of Professor X, who is inexperienced in the world and doesn't quite understand the world, and has to learn how to get to work within the world as well. So it's like he had a child well before he was ready. He had lots of tragedy well before he was ready. And there's also the sense of the Shadow King actually has changed by dealing with David. That he's no longer the villain he was in the past. So it's how do you recognise the fact that someone who did you terrible harm, by dealing with you, he has changed. He is not the same person with the same ambitions. So it becomes a very complicated storytelling line that is essentially about the mental process of this one guy and how that affects his friends, and how for some people it's tragic, how some people it's just very dangerous, and how some of them actually still come through for him despite all of his problems and all what he's done to them. And it becomes this sense of how do you forgive someone who's done terrible things to you, but you know there's potential in them to actually still be good if you help them get there. So it is a beautiful show that doesn't ignore the darkness in people, but it also shows you how people can change as they get older and can learn from their mistakes, so that people who made horrible mistakes and were delusional about what they actually were can actually find themselves and actually be helpful to others. And it's just like this idea of actually moving on from your mistakes. Your mistakes don't define you totally. And it's kind of something that David's making the mistakes through the show, and he's trying to work his way out of it, but he kind of needs help. And he has to learn to accept help, because he's so defined by his own struggle that he finds it very difficult to get help. So, which is all, again, it's all very something that anyone with mental health problems understands. And it's a good way of showing you the problems to the outsiders. Like, this is a big Marvel X-Men version of it, but it is a problem for people. It's like people who have mental health issues make mistakes, and how do you forgive yourself and move on from those mistakes? Hopefully not too bad, the mistakes. So, and it's also just in life, how do you get on from your mistakes and how you've kind of lied to yourself in certain things and made things much worse. How do you move on from that and actually lead a healthier life, or potentially healthier life, or at least make the effort? So this is wonderful. Legion's wonderful. I think it's strong. It's definitely stronger than Alien Earth. Alien Earth is a show that has a lot of good points, but also has some issues. This one is much stronger. This one actually has like a real sense of momentum, a sense of they know where they're going with the story. They know exactly what's going on, and it's limited to 3 seasons, so you get a beginning, a middle, and an end in a weird order sometimes, as my description was in a weird order, but it gets to the point. It gets to the points all the time. So, yeah, this is wonderful. I'd highly recommend it. Go watch it.